Hello and welcome to another An Old Man Watches, and today I'm going to be talking about Puppet Master 4 and 5 from 1993, 1994. I've seen both dates for Puppet Master 5. For my simplicity, I've just used 1993. So the fourth entry in the Puppet Master series returns us to the current day, or then current 1993 anyway. And it also introduces us to the demon Sutekh, whose magical elixir is the source of the puppet's life. So we've had multiple movies, with these puppets running around being alive and sentient, and Sutekh is the creator of the elixir that is the basis of their being able to be alive. And he guards the secret of this elixir very jealously, and he hates that Andre Toulon managed to learn it and wants to prevent anyone else from doing so. And that is why he dispatches 3 of his gremlin-like totems to murder a trio of researchers who are getting close to the secrets of true artificial intelligence. Now, 2 of these 3 researchers go down easy, killed by the totems in no time at all. But unfortunately for Sutekh, the 3rd researcher stumbles across Toulon's puppets just in time to have some deadly marionette security on hand when the totems come to kill him. The puppets fend off this first assault, but it's a temporary respite, or so the spirit of Andre Toulon warns them. He tells them that to thwart Sutekh's plans for good, they must activate Toulon's most secret puppet project, Decapitron. Decapitron. So silly. So I've just given you the plot of Puppet Master 4. It's also the plot of the first 20 minutes of Puppet Master 5, since that film spends a considerable amount of time recapping the previous movie. Now, given the amount of reused footage that entails, I suspect it was doubtless very helpful from a budget perspective. It's not a great way to start a movie, though. I know, like, Evil Dead 2 recaps the first Evil Dead, but it does so a lot quicker. And to a purpose, because it kind of changes the ending of the first movie to set up its own plot. But yeah, Puppet Master 5 spends about 15-20 minutes recapping Puppet Master 4 before launching into its own plot. A plot that is not terribly good, frankly. Let's talk about what works, most of PM4, Puppet Master 4, and what doesn't, which is most of Puppet Master 5. So these 2 films were conceived as the end of the Puppet Master series. It didn't work out that way. The films were a big hit for video stores in the 90s. They were keen for Full Moon to make more. A wish that was not granted until 5 years later, 1998, Puppet Master 6 came out. We'll talk about that more in the future. What's important to keep in mind here is that these films are intentionally setting up what they intend to be the final conflict and conclusion of the Puppet Master story. And I think Puppet Master 4 does a good job of starting this off. It introduces a real big bad in Sutekh. It gives him some cool-looking minions in the totems, and with the slight qualification that the main human character is at times a bit of a jerk, basically sympathetic people for the puppets to protect. It also introduces the gloriously goofy Decapitron, who is every bit as daft as his name, and who I thoroughly adore because of it. Puppet Master 5, on the other hand, is a bit of a mess. It spends way too long recapping Puppet Master 4, then it spends way too long on time-filling secondary human villains who really aren't important, and then, but they're cheap, because it's just people. There's not a lot of special effects needed for people. And finally, it spends way too long on Sutekh's manifestation of a super totem so he can battle the puppets. As a movie, it feels rather empty and low on content, and, as a viewer, I think you're better off treating Puppet Master 4 as the finale. Next, if this was a game of Jeopardy, the answer on the board would be something the Puppet Master series has never cared about, and the answer would be, what is continuity? Or the question would be, what is continuity? And I don't mean the fact that these films introduced Sutekh as an antagonist. There's always been a supernatural provenance to the puppet's animated state, and this is kind of just giving more detail. I can kind of accept that. I'm talking about more fundamental stuff, like ignoring things we have specifically established in previous movies. Puppet Master 2, for instance, ends with the puppets in possession of enough life elixir to keep them running for 50 years. A couple of years later, Puppet Master 4 starts off with most of them in a dormant state. Why? They've got plenty of elixir. Well, I think that's for no other reason that the Full Moon wanted to do a reanimation scene in the film. because they thought it would be cool. And so, the fact that it doesn't make sense given what they've previously established is not important. What's important is we want to do the cool scene. More egregiously, Puppet Master 5 has Sutekh spout monologues that contradict his own statements from Puppet Master 4, which is particularly weird given these movies were made pretty much back to back, written by the same people. Like, they couldn't even keep that straight. Oh, and it shifts the date of Andre Toulon's death for like the third time. But hey, why not? It's been a couple of films since we last did it. And the final thing that I want to talk about, which I think is interesting about the Puppet Master franchise, is that it's one of the very few film franchises that I can think of where the movies noticeably shift genre across entries. You don't see that happen in like Friday the 13th or Halloween or James Bond. The movies in those series might take slightly different tones over time. They might be more or less comedic, and they vary up their villains, particularly Halloween. And James Bond obviously has lots of different villains, though. It's been Blofeld about 47 times, it feels like. But, they have nothing like Puppet Master's willingness to change things up. Alien and Aliens is probably one of the few obvious examples of a sequel that felt quite different to the original, Alien being very straight up horror and Aliens being more action. And Puppet Master does this a lot. Puppet Master 1 and 2 are straight up mini slasher horror movies. They're never actually scary, but they're inventively gruesome, and that's always mattered more for slasher films than scares. The third is a supernatural revenge movie. The fourth is a fantasy action movie, with most of the violence on screen being between the puppets and Sutekh's totems, so it's all it's all non-human characters smashing one another. And as for Puppet Master 5, well, it's not a fantasy action film, because it's quite short on action in general, but it definitely feels more like a fantasy movie in general. It has a scrappy band of hero puppets, but heroes nonetheless, facing off with a powerful supernatural menace. And I think one of the strengths of the early Puppet Master films in general is that Full Moon recognised in the second movie that there was a pretty restrictive limit on what you could do with the original film's formula. It's a great one-shot, but like if you want to turn this into a multiple film franchise, you've got to do more than just have a bunch of strangers turn up and get murdered by the puppets. And they began looking at different scenarios in which their puppet characters could be placed. I don't have any doubt that Puppet Master 3 and 4 would be significantly less entertaining if they were just retreads of the original Puppet Master scenario. I don't know that I can say the same about Puppet Master 5. I think it's bad enough that I can't give it the same credit, especially since one of its main weaknesses is how much it feels like a less entertaining remix of Puppet Master 4. But that's Puppet Master 4 and 5, the finale, the final Puppet Master movies of, there's been like 10 more since then. But, in 1993-4, this was the end. That's Puppet Master 4 and 5. Next time, I'm going to have a definite change of pace, 1999's American Beauty. This is a movie I saw when it first came out, so I was in my mid-20s, and which I felt very differently about when I rewatched it in my 40s, around the same age as the main character of the film. And that was even without factoring in like the Kevin Spacey is in it factor, which obviously in today's situation also has some ramifications to think about. But that's next time. In the meantime, thanks for watching this one. I hope you enjoyed it.